So, Dylan, I know you watched at least one Pacific Division game last night since we had our watch party for the Kraken game. I don't know how much other Pacific Division hockey you caught. I know we were scoreboard watching a little bit, but I talked to you before the watch party and I was looking at the early scores and I was saying, hey, the Kraken might get all the possible help on the scoreboard out of town. You're like, there's a lot of games. Hold up. Like the whole Pacific Division is playing tonight. They're not going to all lose. They all lost.
Mhm.
0-5-1 for the teams around them. And I've been asking this question myself for most of the season, but I think now is a good time to really dive into this. Is the Pacific Division this year the worst division in the salary cap era? And if so, when's the last time we've seen a division this bad in the NHL? Now we have had, the expansion through the 60s and 70s. We had some awful expansion teams in the 90s. There have been divisions worse than this. No doubt. I went back and looked. There have been worse. But when? It's been a while. And so I wanted to look at that question because Dylan, the Pacific, the Pacific just looks awful.
It does. It's not even that they look bad and that they have nights like last night where everybody can lose. It's the fact that essentially every spot in the Pacific is up for grabs and nobody seemingly wants it, right? Like that's the thing that somehow makes this feel worse is the fact that if you look and over their last 10 games, I think Anaheim's the only team over 500 amongst all the teams that are like in this, right? In this hunt that just nobody's like stepping up and actually trying down the stretch, right? Or they're trying and they're just inept. It's just like that's the part about it that makes it feel like extra bad compared to anything we've seen in the past.
Yeah. So I'm going to make the case for the Pacific Division being the worst. And there's so many ways that you can slice it here, so many interesting ways to look at it. We'll start with Anaheim, top of the division. They're at a 94-point pace on the season. That would not have been good enough to make the playoffs last year. Calgary missed it with 96 points. So you start there. That would win the division this year. Then you've got Vegas and Edmonton both at a 90-point pace. LA at 87, San Jose and Seattle at 86. And then to top it off, not only do you have all these mediocre teams trying to fight for a playoff spot because the bar is so low, you also have the two worst teams in the NHL by
Mhm.
points pace here. You got Calgary, 74-point pace, and Vancouver far and away last place with a 60-point pace. So you've got a very low high end and you've got a very low end. So that's a good start if you're trying to be
Yeah.
the worst division in the salary cap era. Also, you can compare it to the Eastern Conference. There are 10 teams in the East that have a better points pace than any team in the Pacific Division. The leader of your division does not even come close to sniffing the playoffs in the other conference. It is that separate. I don't think we've seen anything like that. Certainly as far as difference between one division and the rest in the cap era.
No, it's certainly not in the modern setup of the four divisions, right? The four 8 team divisions. We haven't seen anything like this just because normally there's somebody, right, in that division. Like there's been some rough years in the Metro, but like
Yeah.
Carolina or the Rangers or somebody, right, shows up and it kind of drags things forward. But that is just not happening at all in the Pacific and at all, right? But yeah, I look at the Eastern Conference and I look at like Toronto, who's the second worst team in terms of points in the Eastern Conference with 70 points, and they'd be a point or two out of the playoffs in the Western Conference, and they're 14 points back in the Eastern Conference, right? Like just it's just such a huge gap. You have the Islanders on pace for 99 points and outside the playoff picture in the Eastern Conference, looking to break the Calgary Flames record set last year, like you mentioned, 96 points, missed the playoffs. Islanders on track to break that record. The difference is just so stark, and then Central at least has the 3 teams already above 90 points. like could any team in the Pacific catch any team in the Central right now? If all the Central Division teams stop playing, right? Is like anybody going to get there? It barely is the answer. It is absolutely putrid. I would think that if we're looking for salary cap era, for a division that's as bad as the Pacific has been this year. Got to go back to when there was the 3 divisions per conference, 5-team divisions, and there must have been a year where even the division winner in one of those was kind of so-so, and the rest of the division was bad rebuilding teams. There were certainly times like that in the late 2000s, early 2010s. I could think of some divisions that might have some groups like that, Southeast being most notable.
Yeah, and so for those of us who grew up during the Southeast Division days, or is often called the Southleast Division, and it certainly was the Southleast, I went back and looked, and I think the contender, no matter how far back you have to look to have any kind of competition for the Pacific this year, it has to be out of the Southeast Division. It's amazing how little the other divisions have been anywhere near this bad, but it's got to be the Southeast, and I think the one year you can really make the case for in the cap era is 0708. That's the one. The 0708 Southeast Division. You have the Washington Capitals leading the division with 94 points, that followed by the Carolina Hurricanes with 92 points, Florida Panthers 85, Atlanta Thrashers 76, and the Tampa Bay Lightning with 71, kind of going into their full rebuild. This was a bad division. Make no mistake. It's harder to compare because there's only 5 teams rather than the 8. But Dylan, what do you think? Is this one worse, or is the Pacific Division this year worse? Because I'd still go with the Pacific.
So the Pacific maybe gets the edge because there's 8 teams, right? Like you have 3 more opportunities for somebody to show up, and they're not showing up, right? Like that would be the reason to go with the Pacific. This Southeast Division is pretty bad though. Like
They are. No, they definitely are. Like,
especially when you look at like other teams at that time, right? Like only one other division didn't have a team get to 100 points that year, that being the Northwest Division, and Minnesota at least got to 98, and you had 3 teams that had as many points as the Capitals or more in that division. So I
and the
don't know.
worst team there was Vancouver with 88 points. Like that was
Right.
just pretty evenly split, where they're all pretty good.
Right. Like almost every other division has multiple teams that pass anything the Southeast had. This was a really, really rough division. Only one team getting to the playoffs out of this division. That's the lowest. Uh, I, I'm looking at like goal differentials, not very good. Like yeah. I mean, Washington obviously wins the division. Only 2 teams in the Southeast that year had positive goal differentials. You had Carolina at +3, and then Washington, who wins the division, at +11. Like
Yeah,
that's
it's
tough.
not good, but it still is better than the Pacific this year. You look at Anaheim leading the division, they have a -11 goal differential for the
I
time
know.
being. Vegas has the best goal differential in the Pacific this year, that a +5. So the Southeast already has them
It's
beat
true.
there. And then you look at the bottom of the division, Tampa. That was a bad Tampa team, 71-point Tampa team. Or I guess you have Atlanta with a -56 goal differential right around them too for the worst in the division. Vancouver's already at -76.
Mhm.
To me, there's no contest.
I think the one thing I will say is in today's NHL, teams understand better than ever like what you have to do to rebuild and like what a rebuild looks like. And so I do think on like the low end can't always be judged against the low end from the past, because teams today are better at really tearing things down, getting to the bare bones studs and moving forward like that. Like I feel like the bad
Sure,
teams these
but
last couple years are worse than the bad teams back then.
yes, but are you not just saying they're better at being bad? And we're
No,
talking about
y-
a division of teams that are bad.
yes, no, they are better at being bad. I'm just saying that if it comes to looking at things like goal differential or total points, like they're always going to look worse now, the bad teams, than the bad teams looked back then, because it's more acceptable to be that bad, right? As bad as Vancouver is now than it was back then.
No, you're absolutely right. And I'm saying that's what we're judging this on. So you're right.
Yeah,
It's a good point.
I know.
But Yeah, well, and I think largely it's because they've learned the lessons from, say, that Tampa Bay Lightning of 07-08, who ended up drafting first overall and taking Steven Stamkos and being on their way to another cup winning team, with that core and with Victor Hedman. So they've learned the lessons from those teams for sure. Um, I think again that's the only team I can come up. I mean, division I can come up with in the salary cap era that's even close, and I'd still take the Pacific as worse. I think you have to go back further. And then it gets more difficult too, because you start getting divisions with smaller amounts of teams, prior to earlier expansion. You get more recent expansion teams. And I think you also then get the lack of a loser point
Mhm.
because you have ties. And so then I think you have to grade on a curve with point totals because everybody's
Right.
point totals are lower. And so it gets a little bit more difficult. And the next option I see, and really it's the Southeast Division, like every single time. It's amazing how bad this goes through. 0304, the Southeast, another contender. You have, and I think this probably disqualifies it, but you do have the Stanley Cup champion Tampa Bay Lightning, 106-point team. They win the cup. That leads off the division. And so I think that probably disqualifies it. Plus 53 goal
Mhm.
differential. But then you have Atlanta Thrashers 78 points, Carolina Hurricanes 76, Panthers 75, Capitals 59. It's bad aside from Tampa, but I think having the cup champ kind of takes it out of the running.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, you think about the Southeast Division and just growing up and thinking about those teams. There was the Tampa '04 Cup. There's the Hurricanes Cup, and then not until Washington really figures it out during the Ovechkin era, which is more like 2010, 2011. It feels like. When did you grow up thinking any of these teams were good outside of like those three things, right? Like I just don't remember ever thinking like the Thrashers were never good. Carolina outside of that cup run, they were always like kind of loosely around, but it was because the division was so bad, right? Florida wasn't good ever, right? Like they were picking in the top of the draft multiple times. They had to do like two full rebuilds before they got their current crop of players. Tampa had the really long rebuild and tried to figure it out and everything before they eventually got there in the mid 2010s. So, yeah, growing up late 2000s, early 2010s, it was like Ovechkin and Backstrom and however far they could drag the Capitals, and then the rest of the division was just, Eric Stahl being fine with the Hurricanes being fine, and that was it. Like there was nothing else really going on there.
Yeah, no, that was basically it. So I think we got to go back a little bit further, and don't worry, I won't spend too much more time on this. We got to bring out the big guns here, and we got to go back to 0102. And again, question for you: does this disqualify it? Because I got one more. If this isn't the worst, the last one we've seen that was this bad, we got 0102. You got the Carolina Hurricanes with 91 points, leading the division. Now they did go to the Stanley Cup final, and so I do wonder if that disqualifies it here. But then you've got the Capitals 85 points, and then a trio of awful teams: Tampa 69 points, Florida 60 points, Atlanta 54 points with a minus 101
Jeez.
goal differential. Carolina leading the division with a zero goal differential. No team here having a positive goal differential in the entire division. I think this division can hang with the Pacific as far as how bad it is. That said, you do have a cup finalist. Now, the Pacific, in theory, could have a cup finalist
They
this year. I
could.
doubt it, but it could. This is the first one that seems really close to me.
That is the first one that feels close. Although back then to get a cup finalist, they like had to. Well, it gets weird, right? Because the different playoff structures. Like this year, I would say, oh, it might be easier for the Pacific Division to have a cup finalist just because the first two rounds, they're just playing other Pacific Division teams, essentially, right? Or the Utah Mammoth, who are,
Yeah.
not exactly world beaters as the top wild card, although they are tied with the Ducks in terms of points. So maybe they are, equivalent there. So you're getting somebody to the conference final so easy this essentially because you have to in the current playoff setup, where back then that was not as guaranteed. But you did have whoever won the division getting one of the top three spots in the conference and thus getting at least a good first round matchup.
Yeah, although
Decent-ish,
I
but
wouldn't
not
say it
great.
was a good first round matchup since they did match up with a team that had more points than them via
Yes.
the seeding with the New Jersey Devils. And
Yes.
like the 0-2 New Jersey Devils were no joke. And
Yeah.
Carolina beat them in the first round. You face Montreal then, who's the 8 seed, who then who upset the 1 seed Boston Bruins. So that's a bit
So
easier
and
of a
then the 2
road.
seed must have also lost
Oh yeah, and then the 2 seed, yeah, the 2
in
seed
the
also
first
lost
round.
there. Yeah,
So
that would have been
they got a lot of
Philly.
help.
They did get a lot of help. So maybe you can make a case there. And then if that one's not good enough for you, that if you need one that is definitively worse, I submit to you the 1998-1999 South Least Division, where you have leading the division the Carolina Hurricanes again with 86 points, then Florida with 78, Washington with 68, and then Tampa with 47 points, minus 113 goal differential. And it's a 4-team division. That's all you've got.
Yeah.
This has to be worse than the current Pacific.
That is definitely worse than the current Pacific. That is unreal how bad that is.
Yep. So Southeast Division, whichever year you want to pick, that's the last time we've seen a division this bad, but still very impressive for the Pacific Division, although it's nowhere close to matching the generational run the Southeast Division went on in the mid to late 90s and early 2000s. Pacific's got a lot of years of staying this bad if they want to compete long term, and I don't think they're going to stay this bad.
No, I mean, again, you're talking about one of the more competitive divisions last year, where again, Calgary's on the outside of the playoff picture entirely with 96 points. This year, that wins you the division, right? And I don't think it would be this way next year. This is all good, right? Deciding whether or not it's the worst of all time, all of that stuff. But for me, the interesting portion comes in with why is it so bad? Right? Like that's what keeps getting me is how is the Pacific Division this bad that we're having the conversation of is it the worst division of all time? It's certainly the worst division of the 4 division era, whatever we want to call that, right?
Yeah.
It's a team that has the Edmonton Oilers who have gone to the last 2 Stanley Cup finals and pushed Florida to the brink, right? Both times. You've got Vegas that won a cup not that long ago and still largely has that core group together. LA, which has been a perennial playoff team for a long time. And then the up and coming teams that have been rebuilding Anaheim. San Jose's obviously early in their rebuild. Seattle has been building something.
Just
Right?
about this. Yeah.
Right. Like obviously Calgary, it was evident that they were looking at a rebuild. Vancouver, evident that they were going to have to rebuild. Certainly once they were going to, realize they had to move on from Quinn Hughes. So they're kind of excused. But the fact that none of these teams, you have teams in here that are good or should be on the upswing, and just none of them have performed. And it's not even like they haven't had the opportunity to. Right? Like, now Draisaitl's out for the season for Edmonton, but vast majority of the season you've had McDavid and Draisaitl healthy, right? Like you've had your guys. All these teams haven't really had to deal with like catastrophic injury levels. The fact that just none of them have, I think is the thing for me that's still kind of remarkable. That just one of these teams couldn't figure it out for a 20-game stretch, because that would put them, they would be unpassable at this point if they had a solid 20-game stretch. And none of these 8 teams can do that.
Yeah, well, that's what makes it so remarkable is that, like, I don't think there's a common thread you can run through every team as to why they're all bad this year. It's just different things happening to each one, and not even so much happening to them. Like you said, it's not a ton of like injury adversity. It's just different things messing up each one of their seasons. The fact that it's all happening at once, it feels like lightning striking 8 times in the same place, at the same time. That's what it is. And that's why it's so rare that we see it. And again, you can go by team and explain
Yeah.
for each team why it makes sense that they are where they are. Like and you'll see that for the occasional team every year. There's teams that do worse than you would expect for whatever reason, and they're just usually scattered, not all in the same division. And what makes it even more difficult is the fact that they are all in the same division means they play each other so much more often, and so they have much easier schedules, all of them,
Mm-hmm.
because they get to face each other. And yet it doesn't, no team's been able to take advantage of that.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like that's the bit that really feels strange about all this is that yeah, you can have like Edmonton and Vegas, neither team can get a save, and that's what's keeping them in this spot. Anaheim's still just trying to figure it out with a young team, so they're kind of on a roller coaster with regards to that. LA's like on the other end of that spectrum where it's an aging team and they're trying to, deal with that passing of the torch between groups. It's just it's so strange to me that all of that could happen at the same time, that they could all play each other at the same time, and just nobody can seemingly find a way to be incrementally better than the rest. Like that seems like in today's NHL impossible, right? Like we're past the early days of the salary cap where it was like everything was gearing towards parity, right? And like the league's big focus was on parity. And obviously that's still a big focus for the league and the salary cap and all of that. But to actually have this level of parity where where you're talking about still like the fifth best team in the division has a chance to win the division this late into the season, that does the NHL really want this? If the parity is going to look like this, is this what the NHL wants?
I don't think this is what Gary Bettman had in mind when talking about parity, but I mean, it works. They're exciting games all the way through the end of the season. Like it's going to come down to the wire.
It is. Yeah, no, from
Somebody
an
is going to
entertainment.
have to get those spots,
Yeah,
even
like
though they should be. Not really, but I'm like, it's such a shame because I would love to just swap out the second wild card in the West for whichever team is the last to not make it in the East.
well, so that's the thing is like I feel like from an entertainment factor, this is what the NHL wants, right? Like you have more markets at 69, 68 games into the season feeling like they're in it and paying attention, and this last stretch of 10 games for everybody, 12 games is going to matter immensely for these fan bases. And you're keeping as many teams as possible engaged. Like that's exactly what the NHL wants. Like they
Yeah,
are
you're
getting
right.
it. And I do think that it's just probably the way the math works. I'm not good enough to figure that out. Um, Kind of dictates that it's yeah, you're not going to be having that situation play out if all the teams are 100+ point teams, right? Like because they have to beat up on each other and limit each other to an extent. But I do feel like as bad as the division is, as rough as the hockey is to watch, as much as the roller coaster is there for all of these fan bases, and all of these fan bases are having to sit there and ask themselves after many, many games this season, what the heck is wrong with these guys? They, they're all still in it. They're all going to be paying attention, and everybody's going to be very engaged through mid-April. And that is the goal if you're the NHL, is to keep as many fan bases engaged throughout as much of the season as possible. And the Pacific Division is doing it. So really, RJ, who are the winners? Because I would say the Pacific Division is the real winners. They're going to have the best gate receipts down the stretch of any of these divisions. That's what matters.
See, in theory, but we have seen the temptation of how checked out it can be for some of these
Oh yeah.
teams. You think Kraken fans are really excited about how things going for their team after that loss last night? They're still in it. They didn't lose any ground. You think Kings fans feel thrilled about how the season's going? I mean, most Kings fans I know checked out a couple months ago. I don't even know that they're like more engaged. Maybe they'll come back in the last week if they think there's a realistic chance. But I think when everybody's this bad, it's just so hard to enjoy the fact that you're still in the race when it's so clear it's only because every other team is just as bad as you are. I don't know. This is an extreme. I will say this is
Yeah.
certainly an extreme case. Also, you combine that with the loser point as far as what the NHL wants.
Hmm.
This is what Gary Bettman wants.
It
The
is.
LA Kings holding down the final playoff spot in the West with 28 wins and 40 losses
Yep.
on the season.
No, it's
Gotta love the
it's
loser point.
it's doing its job. 16 OTLs, Vegas with 14. This division, they've cracked the code, RJ. They've cracked the code of mediocrity. This is how you survive.
Yep. All right, let's stop. Let's talk about anything but the Pacific Division. I brought it up that I wanted to talk about it first, and I did. I'm sick of it now. I'm absolutely sick of this awful division.
It is really rough. It is really rough. All right, so let's talk about some other stuff. I mean, the big news, I mentioned Leon Draisaitl is out for the rest of the regular season with an injury. Somebody else that is also out for the rest of the season now with an injury, and that is Auston Matthews after taking a knee-on-knee hit from Radko Gudas of the Anaheim Ducks. Auston Matthews out for the rest of the season. The NHL without its top two highest paid players for the rest of the season, RJ. That's not what Gary Bettman wants down the stretch. I can guarantee you that. But Auston Matthews, the Leafs announcing, I believe it was yesterday, that he had successful surgery on his MCL with a 12-week timeline, recovery timeline for Auston Matthews there. Leafs aren't making the playoffs or anything. This shuts him down for sure for the rest of the year and everything. The questions come around a couple things here. And we probably don't need to spend a ton of time on the Leafs angle as far as nobody stood up for him. Nobody went and fought Radko Gudas. They were kind of on a line change. I don't think many people saw kind of what happened, and the linesmen saw it right away and kind of surrounded Radko Gudas. So there wasn't a ton of opportunity there. The Department of Player Safety does suspend Radko Gudas after the hit. Player who, you know, doesn't deserve a ton of, benefit of the
Benefit of the
doubt.
doubt.
Yeah, he has not earned that in his career. I know he in the moment did act like that was not his intention, that the contact was not meant to be that bad. I mean, if you watch, Radko Gudas immediately like turns around like I wasn't trying to do that. But again, he has not earned the benefit of the doubt in his career. The big thing for Toronto though is RJ. They were already sellers at the deadline. They're having to kind of rebuild. We're going to see what the offseason brings. Certainly, if Leafs fans have their way, Greg Berube as coach will be out, and Brad Treliving as general manager would be out. There could be a lot of change in line for the Maple Leafs moving forward. How does that affect Auston Matthews? Because he has struggled these last couple of years. He's had injury issues. He lost Mitch Marner, who he was very close with, obviously in a very public way this past year. The team doesn't look particularly close to getting back to being competitive right now, but that can change. So, but there's lots of, rumors floating around about Auston feeling as though, you know, team's not going to really be where he wants it to be for these last 2 years that he has remaining on his contract. Does he want to be traded? 28, got to be considering things like that. What are your thoughts on everything regarding Auston Matthews and the Maple Leafs kind of moving forward here? Because I have to assume after the Mitch Marner thing, they would hate to just like try to pull it together for these last 2 years with him and then risk having him walk for nothing, kind of the way Mitch Marner sort of did. Obviously, they technically traded him, but it was for nothing, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, you can't afford a repeat of that situation. I'm certainly not with a player who's, I think, worth even more than Mitch Marner and Auston Matthews. Starting with the hit, though, from Gudas, the knee on knee. I mean, I probably share your sentiments as far as how it was handled, the Department of Player Safety and all that sort of thing. But watching the video back, I'm gonna push back on that it was maybe okay that there wasn't an immediate reaction. There were Leafs players looking right at it. And Easton Cowan, I know, young player, like you don't want to expect a player that young to have to stand up, but he's right there in the area looking right at it. There's a defenseman at the blue line looking right at it. There's players coming off the bench, as you can see on the video, they're looking right at it. Yeah, you're a little far from it, but if your captain goes down with a hit like that, and I don't get, maybe it's a mistake, maybe it's an accidental collision, maybe it's not as bad as it looked. I'm not asking questions in those moments. Like you go at Gudas and you send a message, and hey, if it was an accident or whatever and you're wrong, nobody's going to fault you for that, for getting up in his face. Nobody.
Right.
And the fact that the Leafs for years have tried to fix this, culture problem, and I mean, really at the expense of skill, and I think at the expense of being a better team, have tried to bring in guys where it's like, no, we're going to be tough and we're going to have a culture and stand up for each other. The ultimate example, your captain being taken out with a season-ending injury, and there's nobody up in Gudas's face, nobody. You've failed on all accounts, and I think that's the ultimate, just basically end mark for the season here for the Leafs, and it's fitting. It's fitting for what this group is and what they've become. So I wanted to push back on that because I don't care. People were looking at it. You need to, even if you didn't see it, you got to get in Gudas's face, even if you have to be kind of trying to get around a linesman, I don't care.
Yeah, no, look, obviously, I think that that should be what happens, right? Like, this is hockey. That's literally why this is still in the sport, is so that you know, the self-policing aspect of it. I just know what people have kind of used as the excuse on it, but this is why Austin Matthews is potentially upset, because nobody did stand up for him,
Yeah,
right?
and he
Like, that
should be.
is that is something that, especially if you're the captain and that situation plays out, I don't think it's petty to be a little like, why why did nobody care? Right?
Yeah.
I think that that's a very legitimate reason to be upset.
Yeah, and I know later in the game, there were guys going after people. I get that, but it's not the same as going at it right at the moment. But as for the bigger picture stuff, as for what you actually asked about, with Auston Matthews in that situation, he does have 2 years left on his contract, and so you're not in this immediate rush like with the Mitch Marner situation, where you've got to figure something out. If he had one fewer year on his contract, then you're in a real bind here. I think it's still too early to be talking about trading him, because at the end of the day, you are never going to get anywhere near fair value moving a player
Mhm.
like that, because he has the full no move clause. He has complete control over his destination. And unless he's going to say to you, yeah, just trade me anywhere, I want to help you out, which again, if he's feeling this way and wants out, why would he?
Right.
Like, that's the whole thing, is if he wants out, if he is disgruntled, if you have reason to trade him because he doesn't want to play for you anymore, he's not going to do you any favors with the destination. And at that point, you might as well hang on and hope things get better next year, because you still do have a fair amount of talent on this team. Like, the east west divide that we just talked about and how high the bar is, that's not going to be the case again next year. That's a once in a generation type thing that we're seeing. There should be enough talent on this team to at least make the playoffs. And I think with a different coach, they certainly could. Like, you brought in Craig Berube, who is the type of coach that will get you through. He's not the coach that'll get you there to the playoffs. You need enough talent alone to do that. But he's the kind of coach that will make you a worse regular season team to make you a better playoff team. I mean, he basically has tried to turn Auston Matthews into like a Sasha Barkov type, basically,
Mhm.
which is not going to help you as much in the regular season. But come the playoff time, it's more important. You're back at the point where you need to have a coach that's just going to let you play in a way that's going to make the playoffs. And I think that should make everybody happier until at least the inevitable, first round loss. But at least then you're feeling a little better about where the team is.
Well, and also, isn't this whole situation an indictment on the culture that Berube has put in place and
Yeah.
the lack of it taking, right? And I remember we talked about this earlier this season before Red Glare went public about, had Berube lost the room already, essentially. And I think that this proves it, right? In St. Louis, I cannot imagine this situation playing out with any of their top players taking that hit from Radko Gudas and nobody stepping up for them.
No, absolutely not. And in fact, you would almost guaranteed have Blues players go and injure
They'd go out,
whoever the best
they'd be
player is on
taking
the
runs
opposing
at
team.
Leo Carlson.
Yeah, they'd go take runs at Leo Carlson. Exactly. They'd send that message right away. Now, I don't condone that. I don't think
Yeah,
that's the right thing to
no,
do, but that's the kind of thing they would be doing. And so it sends the message not to do that.
right.
And it just didn't take it all with this Leafs team.
Yeah. So I think that you got to be out there. There is talent on this team, although you're going to be talking about like 36-year-old John Tavares next year. Willie Nylander is going to be in Toronto forever. He seemingly has zero desire to leave, kind of regardless of how good or bad the team is. But there was heavily reported that the Leafs were shopping Matthew Nyes at the deadline, right? Like, if Toronto is really legitimately thinking maybe we do have to kind of start over here, I don't I don't know why you wouldn't then try to move Auston Matthews. And yeah, you're not going to get equivalent value back for him, but if you're talking about trading a 24-year-old Matthew Nyes, right? He's 23 now, he'll be
On a good
24 next
contract.
year. Yeah, on a good contract, then I don't know how you don't consider moving Auston Matthews. Like that's
Yeah.
irresponsible.
Well, yeah, if you're looking to move Nye, I don't know how serious that actually is with moving knives. I don't see why you would do it. I think it might be tempting. Look, a lot of teams at the deadline this year seemed like they wanted to know what they could get for some
Mhm.
of their better players. I mean, you look at St. Louis, who has much more of a reason to tear it down than I think Toronto does with the core and ability to, looking at Thomas and Kyrou and they don't end up moving them. I think I don't know how much there really is to the Nyes stuff, because it just doesn't make sense to move them. But the thing is, just you you really lack flexibility in this forward group. And I think maybe there's the temptation to see, okay, could we move him for maybe a couple players that make us deeper and able to compete a little bit more? And that might be more what it's about, because he's the only guy with significant value who you really can move.
Yes. It's yeah, I mean it's a bad spot either way, right? Like you're either giving up one of the few guys that can legitimately perform on the team to try to get more depth, or you just don't have any depth, and that has been just absolutely crushing this team all year long. And then you sell off the little bit of depth that you have, including Nick Waugh, who was, did have value and did come back in that Mitch Marner trade, so it wasn't technically for nothing. Um, but yeah, it's such a tough spot for them to figure out this offseason. And again, it goes deeper than just trying to figure out, do you hold on to Auston Matthews? Does Matthews want to stay? You have to make calls on the coach. You have to make calls on your front office. And if it's a new front office, new coach, I would assume that they're going to want to have Auston Matthews for at least a year
Oh,
and
for
see
sure.
what they can do with him and see what kind of team they can put around him. And I would imagine no matter how upset Auston Matthews is, that he'd be willing to play out at least one of these last 2 years on his contract under a new regime and see if that fixes things and gets things going. So as much as I know the Auston Matthews stuff has been going around and it's a nice, fun, catchy thing to talk about, I think next offseason, right, a year from now, the 27 offseason would be the offseason that we would potentially see movement on something. And that's only if next year doesn't fix any of the problems that he has and that the Leafs have now.
Yeah, I think this is one you probably just table for a year. Like they got to clean house, right?
There's so many things they need to do, and that they probably will do. Like if they don't, I guess then maybe you see Auston Matthews being like, okay, you can let me out early. If Trey Living and Berube just come back and they're just like, we just think this was a blip and we can we're gonna fix it with more odd depth choices. Then maybe if I'm Auston Matthews, I'm like, all right, maybe you can start talking to other teams for me. But I just don't see how that's possible.
No, I don't either. And I'm in my mind just trying to think of even like if I'm an opportunistic GM right now and I'm looking around at seeing what kind of trade package I could offer to maybe get them to think. I'm going around the teams I could imagine Matthews going to, and I can't think of a trade package that's going to make sense for both teams at this point.
No, no. All right. So going back to the hit and the Department of Player Safety. So Radko Gudas does get a 5-game suspension from them, but it was, as is always the case when something like this happens, where you're taking one of the top players in the league out for the rest of the season, people question, is 5 games enough for something like that, right? Like this was a potentially career-ending injury. It's certainly enough to knock him out for the rest of the season. Would have knocked him out for playoff time if the Leafs were going to the playoffs, a substantial amount of playoff time. And the Department of Player Safety levies 5 games, right? A player like Radko Gudas, who is like a third pairing defenseman, is out for 5 games. The Leafs are without their captain and arguably best player for the rest of the year. It's one where I know in the past people have argued for suspensions to be tied to other players' injuries. That's a really complicated thing to try to figure out. I don't think
Yeah,
that you can do it
there's a lot of
realistically.
gamesmanship possible there too.
Yes, but 5 games feels light for something like this. Given, again, we're talking about a player who has a history, a substantial history in the case of Radko Gudas.
Yeah, I mean he
Oh,
has
like
had
it's
four prior suspensions
right.
uh to this. I mean, including a 10 gamer in 2017.
Right, but
It's
that's too far back for the Department of
I
Player
know. Well,
Safety to look at.
yeah, and I think that needs to be revised as far as like the repeat offender thing is if you've gone a while without a suspension. I think, when you have up to the level of 4 or 5 suspensions in your career, that again, I would totally overhaul the repeat offender thing. But yeah, with Gudis, I think also the NHL, I have no idea why they locked themselves in by going with the phone hearing as early as
Mhm.
they did, because that's the other key part of this rules wise, is that if you have a phone hearing for a suspension, the maximum a player can be suspended is 5 games, which is I think is why you arrive at that 5 game number.
Yeah.
They couldn't have gone any higher. I would have gone in-person hearing for
Yeah,
this one. Because look, it gives you more time. It gives you a range of options as far, look, you don't have to go over 5
you
if you
don't.
feel like it, you hear his side of things and you decide that it's not, then you can go under 5. I think the NHL though, I mean, tell me if you disagree here, but I think the NHL is so scared of the union here. And look, I'm sorry, I think the NHLPA is partially responsible here because I if a suspension is more than 5 games, you often have the union appeal it,
Right.
and they're pretty strong there, and usually they can get the suspension reduced. I think the NHL at this point is just like, all right, well, if the players don't want it, why bother? Why bother going more than 5 games? Doesn't matter to us. They're the ones supposed to care about player safety. They're the players' representatives. They're just going to appeal it anyway. We'll just stick to 5.
Yeah, there's that side of it. The other thing that I thought of was, do they not want to do an in-person hearing because they don't want to pull a player away during a condensed schedule season, right? Like by giving Gudis an in-person hearing and having him potentially have to go to New York or Toronto or anywhere, potentially, you know what I mean, like takes him out of a game or something like that, right? And I was wondering if they were concerned about that given the condensed schedule, which again is BS. Like they shouldn't really be that concerned. You're suspending him something, so having him miss some time is
Right.
not a huge deal.
And for that kind of hit, it's not going to be a 1 game
It's not,
suspension. He's not
no.
going to be rushing back to Anaheim. I don't buy that
Yeah.
reasoning.
But I could see that being a reason why they did that, right? Even though, right? Like just because. But the bottom line is the Department of Player Safety has been rough for a while now. All of it under George Peros. We've been so critical of it for a long time now. I know people, especially Leafs fans, were trying to say that he was kind of being soft on Gudis because he's a former Anaheim Ducks player, and it's Anaheim Ducks. I don't think that at all. Like
I
I
don't
don't
think
think
so
that
either.
played into this at all because I think this is very consistent with all of the decisions that the Department of Player Safety has made under George Peros, where they've all been soft compared to the injury or threat of injury that hits and situations have been. I mean, I still can't believe at how the situation years ago now with Tom Wilson and Artemi Panarin got played out, where they were just like, well, Panarin didn't really get hurt, so I guess it's fine. It's like, no, he dropped him on his head. He picked him up, turned him around, and dropped him on his head. Like, you can't have stuff like that. This is another example of just like this Department of Player Safety just kind of does their thing. It always feels soft to everybody, right? Like pretty universally. I don't see anybody who's not like, yeah, the suspension couldn't have been more. Um, Outside of maybe Pat Verbeek, if you asked him. But I don't understand why the NHL still is allowing headlines and the conversation to be about the Department of Player Safety. And that's the thing that ultimately gets me, is that for a league that is so concerned about how they're perceived, and for Gary Bettman, who for everything that he has done as commissioner has certainly made some mistakes, the one thing that he is usually really good at is taking, steering conversations away from negative aspects of the league or things that are going to make people have negative conversations around the league. Yet when it comes to the Department of Player Safety, they don't do that, right? He hasn't been able to do that because the Department of Player Safety just continually makes these poor calls, and he hasn't done anything to fix the fact that they continually make poor decisions.
Yeah, and I think there's probably a worry that if they do larger suspensions, that's going to be talked about and complained about, and I don't buy that necessarily as a good reason.
You're not going to
But
take too much hit. You're not going to take too much heat from being overly concerned about player safety. Like that's never going to happen.
no, it's not, and especially when it comes to protecting your star players,
Right.
when it's your best players and making sure that see what the NFL did. I mean, many years ago now, but it was after that, like Tom Brady, I think, torn ACL hit, where they decided to protect the quarterbacks, and it's a
Mhm.
little too much. Like
Mhm.
I'll admit, they kind of went overboard with it, but you know what? It's better than having all the quarterbacks, the most skilled players in the league out. Like there's
Right.
nothing worse than get a late season game that means something. You got two backups in there. It's just awful football.
Mhm.
And I think the NHL needs to kind of make a similar decision there. And it doesn't mean like, you know, saying you can't touch these guys at all. But if you make an obviously dangerous hit that injures a player out for the season, this is just the ultimate case. There's no gray area here.
Right.
You can throw the book at a guy for that. And they just don't do that. And I think it's gotten to the point too. And I know you're going to ask the question of like, have we actually reached a kind of a breaking point here? Because you have other players now. Connor McDavid spoke up about this, and he's not usually one to speak up on things.
Mhm.
He didn't need to. He's not Matthews' teammate, but he does say, he said, I can't speak to what changes to make. I'm a player, but I think every time there's suspension, most times there's suspension, there's a lot of frustration from the player side. So why don't we take a look at the process and figure out a way that works for everybody? Now he's not proposing any specific changes. Of course, I wouldn't expect that from
Yeah.
McDavid, but the fact that Connor McDavid of all people is talking about this when he doesn't have to, and bringing up that there is a problem, I think you are starting to see more momentum for it.
I do as well. I think that's an excellent point. It feels like this is the first big moment in time where we could potentially see that because people seem so united and vocal, right? Like this feels like the first time since back when the Department of Player Safety was last overhauled and a bunch of rules were put in to protect players from headshots, right? Going back to similar time frame as the Southeast Division that we were talking about, right? The days of Matt Cook going around and concussing guys with just open ice headshots and things like that, right? Like that was the last time that we saw the Department of Player Safety overhauled, was when essentially you were having careers ended due to concussions, right? Notable players having careers ended or significantly altered because of head injuries. And so the league decided that, okay, we need to start taking head injuries seriously because this is, I mean, I wish it was because they just cared about the player's health, but really they stepped in because it was a horrible headline, and that's what people were starting to associate with the NHL. And so
Right.
they
And yet
had to make
Sidney
changes.
Crosby missing that much time and
Right.
his career potentially threatened. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So they felt like they had to do it. This feels like, again, because it's Auston Matthews and he is such a star player, and because this has been brewing for so long, but it was always around situations that were never quite as serious as this, that we've kind of reached that point again where you do have guys like Connor McDavid speaking out, and you have general managers communicating as such to Gary Bettman. And that was the big thing that really surprised me and told me that things were different, which was at the league meetings that the league had this past week, where the general managers board all come together, meet with the league officials and everything. Gary Bettman had to face conversations around this, particularly from Eric Tulsky, general manager for the Carolina Hurricanes, who talked about Rule 48, which is the illegal checks to the head rule. And while it wasn't specific, obviously, in this case, to this Auston Matthews case, right? Because that was knee on knee contact and everything. It was around the conversation of how the league does rule on these things and whether or not standards were slipping, and how they were supposed to apply things practically, and how they're supposed to communicate to their players around these situations and everything, because that language hasn't been very clear from the NHL, and there's tons of ambiguity there, which, to be fair, is a common thread throughout the NHL rulebook. If you go and you read like penalties, minor penalties in the rulebook, it is so left up to the interpretation of the official that that's why lots of times, if you're a fan and you're watching an NHL game and you're like, is that boarding? Well, boarding is written intentionally vague so that the ref at the moment can make the call on if they deem it boarding or not. So this is a larger issue that the NHL has. But Eric Tulsky bringing up Rule 48, particularly as it applies to taller players making contact with shorter players, and the idea that, look, head contact is going to come about in those situations just because taller player, their hands are going to be at head height for a shorter player, particularly if a shorter player has got the puck and they're crouched down a little bit, right? There's going to be incidental contact. How do we communicate to the players around these situations, and how are you going to judge that? Because this is a rule put in to protect players' heads. They are taking head contact. When does it cross the line, and how do we manage those things? And Gary Bettman didn't seem to receive this well. It's everybody's kind of universally said that there was a disagreement or an argument at the very least. Doesn't sound like it was like full on shouting match and everything, but everybody said that Gary Bettman definitely put pushed back on that hard and tried to defend the league. But I think for me, well, and the big thing from Gary was basically alluding to the fact that, look, we know this is coming from your owner Tom Dundon, who has been vocal about this, which I think is interesting that he would bring that up, given Tom Dundon is owner in the league and thus one of Gary Bettman's bosses.
Yeah, that's who
So
he works for.
yeah, but I think that shows that Gary took it personal to a level where he would bring Tom Dundon into it when he's not even there, and that's not who it is. And so I think that it did strike a nerve for Gary Bettman, and that tells me that he is feeling pressure from all sides, not just from the general manager speaking up, which again is also notable because they tend not to do that with him, right? Like the league is generally very unified behind Gary Bettman. He is the man that they have, weathered multiple strikes and lockouts and all of these things with. They're normally pretty behind him, but this tells me that Gary Bettman is definitely feeling heat.
Yeah, no, you could see it in the reaction, and I think I do wonder if part of it is if the reaction is just kind of the process. Like I don't know this, I don't know the inner workings of this sort of thing, but I could imagine there might be a sense among Bettman and the owners, like, look, if you have an issue with me privately, we address it privately. You bring it up to me,
Hmm.
I work for you, and I'm going to do what I do and make my decisions. You don't go through your GM and have him bring it up at that meeting or whatever to try and address it with me or something. I might imagine there's something like that potentially going on, but still, I mean, he does seem like he kind of feels threatened there.
Yeah.
And, I'm sure he knows, Connor McDavid speaking out about this sort of thing and, the way that player safety is handling all this stuff. Like, I think the momentum is building a little bit, but Dylan, I'm so pessimistic with these things. Like, I'm not going to hold my breath. I don't know. Do you think this is actually the time we see change? Because I will not believe it with the NHL until I see it.
No, I mean, I think with the headshots, it took career ending or again, like generational face of the league player being injured with significant questions about whether or not he could continue to be the face of the league at a very young age. I mean, Crosby was in his early 20s when that happened. Like, it literally took that to take out something that seems barbaric by today's standards in sports, right? Like, just letting guys fly around with their elbows out right to the chins and jaws of other players. So I'm not optimistic that things will change. I am interested to see if they start tightening up the rule book a little bit just to remove some of the ambiguity that's there, because not only do you have Eric Tulski bringing this up, but apparently there was also a conversation had, it sounds like maybe Pat Verbeek brought this up, around goalie interference and the situations there and how that's being applied, and if standards were slipping there or if it's just the ambiguity of it all. I mean, we talk about this all the time. Um, you never know on goalie interference calls. Like, it's just so, it just seems almost at times random how they decide to go with things, or very feel based. I do wonder if the thing that comes out of this, or at least the way that the league kind of takes some of the heat off of themselves and the Department of Player Safety, is not through reform over how they do suspensions, but just a tightening up of the rule book, because the rule book is written so intentionally vague and there is the room for them to kind of lay things out a little bit more. And I understand why they haven't wanted to do that. It's because then you're setting a standard that then you have to be held to, and the Department of Player Safety would have to be held to. But it would be a lot easier for them to do that than to really actually tackle full on reform. And then that's something that I just don't believe they're ready to do right now.
Yeah, agreed. And I think it can help in certain situations. Look, I'm glad the rule book is written in a way that does, for individual penalties, I'm talking like a minor
Yeah,
penalty or whatever,
same.
give the officials a lot of, room to kind of figure those things out on the ice, because you don't want those things taking a lot of time. I get that.
Yep.
But when it comes to things like suspension reviews, or even to a lesser extent goalie interference, where you have time to look at it, where
Hmm.
you are reviewing it, and where you can sit down and look at a replay and you don't have to just judge it with one look in the moment, I think then you can make it more specific, tighten it up. I mean, with goalie interference, I think what the NHL should do is make a flow chart.
Hmm.
Like literally, because fans have done this. Like they've read the language of the rule and kind of made a flow chart, even though the language is so vague, the flow chart
Yeah.
isn't foolproof. It's really not. So I'm not talking about the fan made ones, but if the NHL had a flow chart about just, okay, is there contact? Yes, no. Is it in the crease? Yes, no. Was the player pushed in? Yes, no. And just have it logically. I mean, because this is how things, with laws, just legally, this is how things
Hmm.
like that work in where you either, meet and or type of categories, right? If you have that and you have that available to fans, now you might be able, there's reasonable disagreement about, like, let's say whether contact with the goalie was caused by a defensive player pushing the guy in. There's a lot of gray area there. You're still going to have that. I understand that, but at least everybody knows, okay, here is where it was decided,
Right.
and this was the determination that yes, there was this, no, there was this. you know the NHL ought to release something like that. It would clear up a lot of confusion, and for goalie interference especially, I think that's one, like, they should have done that a long time ago. There's no excuse to not have it.
Right. Well, and the reason that they've always pushed back on challenges and doing excessive, numbers of reviews, as they would say, and everything like that is because it interrupts the flow of the game. But the way it's set up right now, when there is a challenge, or when a team is trying to make a challenge, or trying to figure out if they should be challenging it or whatever, because everything is so vague and there is nothing like what you're describing, it makes the whole process take longer. Right? Like having a
It
flowchart
does.
like that the teams have internally so that their video coaches can start running through it and decide quicker if they feel like there should be a challenge. And then if there is a challenge, it makes it quicker for the people in Toronto, the situation room, who's reviewing it, or anybody in the arena, refs, whoever, when they're doing a review, makes it quicker for them to do that review process, have the end result, get back to the game at hand. Like literally the thing the league is worried about could be addressed by them just having more clarity here. And I just don't know why you wouldn't do that. Other than occasionally, sometimes, I don't even think most of the time, but occasionally, there would be instances where they're going to make a call because of something a little subjective, and the majority of people are going to see it the other way and be critical of how they made that call. They're going to say, how could you have done that, when clearly step 2 in this process would say that it means it's goalie interference or not, right? And the league is worried about that. But like, we live in the day and age of social media. You put an opinion out there, or you make any sort of mistake, people are going to be critical about it. You got to hear about it for 48 hours and then everybody moves on. Like, just get over it, league. Like, I feel like they're very stuck in the past when it comes to being worried about negative PR. Like, again, the problem is fans not knowing what goalie interference is. The problem is guys like Auston Matthews being out for the year. Like, these are the real problems. Having some negative PR out there, some people not liking you, isn't the problem. Everybody already hates Gary Bettman. What does he care?
Yeah, I mean, it's this, yeah, it's an old school mindset that you can possibly be immune from conversation or criticism. In the social media age, that just doesn't exist anymore. It's
Right.
gone. But as you said, the trade-off for that, to benefit you if you're like the league, is that it all goes away in like 2 days because
Hmm.
people move on to the next thing. You got to figure out that lesson of just modern media. Like
It's just
it's something I
PR.
think a lot of other leagues, PR, yeah, a lot of other leagues have learned that a long time ago. Like, this has been the case for a long time. This isn't new. Social media is not new.
Mhm.
Short attention spans aren't new. Got to figure it out.
Yeah. And they're not, and they won't. Um, yeah,
It's
because
how
I
we always end these
I
conversations, isn't
know.
it?
Yeah, it is. And literally every time we talk about the league. Um, yeah, and I won't even go to the point of like, oh, is this the early beginnings of Gary Bettman being on the outs? GMs are critical. No, not even close.
No,
I'm
nope.
convinced Gary's there until he either is forced to retire due to some sort of circumstance, or he decides to retire. Right? Like that. I
Oh
don't
yeah, he'll
see
never
them
be
ever
pushed out.
replacing
No, no,
him.
no, no,
Yeah.
no.
No, they love him too much. All right. Anything else on that, or Leafs, or anything else small, RJ, that you want to bring up before we close out the podcast?
No, I think that's about it.
All right. That's going to do it, everybody, for this episode of the Regular Podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you all next time.